At this time, I want to introduce panel number one. Panel number one is entitled LeadBlack, Black Men Transforming Education. At this time, I'd like to welcome to the podium, to the platform, the moderator for LeadBlack, Black Men Transforming Education. Let's make some noise, thunderous round of applause for Brother Malik Ray. Come on, let's give it up for Malik.
Good morning, brothers. I'm gonna just for the show. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, guys. Excited to be here with you this morning. I'm just here as a conduit. This is your conversation to own. Hopefully, we're having the discussion that meets the moment in this room. First up, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First up, Jason Terrell, the president of the Dobbs Foundation, is going to join us on stage. After him, we have Senator RaShaun Kemp of Georgia's 38th District. And finally, Dr. Duke Bradley, Superintendent of Newton County Schools. Thanks for being with us this morning, gents. Excited to chat. Before we dive in, just want to reiterate that this is your conversation. So I want to start with posing a question to the room. Show of hands, how many of you would say that you actively bring your identity to your leadership or work? All right, we're in the right room then. All right, that's what we're doing here. Because that's what the conversation is about. It's beyond theory, right? Let's talk about lived experience and what this looks like in the practical, the things that we as Black men are going through as we attempt to do this very important work. My first question is for all three of you, and then we'll do a bit more nuanced. Black men leading in education carry both the weight of expectation and the gift of cultural insight, right? Understanding the people that they serve. How does embracing your identity, or how has embracing your identity shaped your leadership? I'd love to hear from each of you. Who wants to start?
Yeah, I'll go. RaShaun Kemp, State Senator, Senate District 38. Prior to me getting into the advocacy space, I was a high school principal, and I became a principal at the age of 27. And that was critical to me being successful, because here you have this young kid telling these teachers that had 20 plus years experience over him what they needed to do or how they can improve. I was in the classroom, 2 years? But my experience of bringing my full self allowed me to be that much more impactful with the students, to have that connection, for them to see that I'm just a regular person just like them, that just has a kind of an extraordinary role in the space that we were in. But it also gave teachers the freedom and flexibility to be themselves, because a lot of times what we have to do as leaders is model what we want to see in other people. And I always saw it my responsibility to pull somebody up with me, to make sure that before I left that school, my replacement was sitting right there at the right-hand side of me. It was critical for my success early on.
So I grew up in a somewhere in the spectrum of a middle-class family. I think there were days that we probably felt that we were a little more middle-class than we actually were, and some days when we felt like we were a little less middle-class than we actually were. My mother and father met in college, married, had a family. We moved to my hometown of Columbus, Georgia. My mom is a retired educator, spent 35 years as a classroom teacher. My father is a retired businessman, served on our city's local school board. I share that as a little bit of a backdrop into my personal experience, but also as a backdrop to the fact that my kind of entry into public education was in spaces that were, I think, uniquely urban, and I think had challenges that were a little different than what I experienced growing up. I share all of that to say that oftentimes I think leaders are finding their identity within the context of the jobs that they do. Because I think early on in my career, dating back 20 some odd years, there were times where I felt some measure of insecurity because of this question of relatability. When I was a student as an undergrad, I was working in schools and was constantly confronted with the question of what of your experience has led you here, right? And I think it's perfectly fine for you to care for kids and care about their outcomes and care about the opportunities that are created. And you can lead that even though you may not necessarily have had the same origin story that they have had as well. So I think the question around cultural identity is fair, but I think it's also important to note that there are some leaders that we perhaps maybe look up to and look for leadership to are working to find their own cultural identities within the context of the jobs that they do.
Yeah. Yes, it's a good question. So to give you context, I grew up here in Atlanta. Parents had me in high school, so grew up really in a village of grandparents. But a lot of what shaped me is my grandfather, who was a minister in town. So he instilled a lot of principles in me, and which one kind of made me go into education. So initially started my career as a teacher. I was a middle school English teacher, but found my way in a nonprofit and now in the foundation space. And if you don't know about the foundation world, it's predominantly 90% white women specifically. So when I'm in rooms, I'm often the only Black person, and foundations are critical because they're providing capital, so resources to nonprofit organizations that are doing the critical work like BMEsTalk and some other organizations in the room. So often I have to sometimes be that voice to talk about what communities are facing. Folks often read the statistics and think, we're numbers. You have to put faces to the numbers. You have to put stories and context. So that's something I can provide just because a lot of it is lived experience, but it's also, I'm in these communities. I'm with the folks, a lot of these folks are my peers that we fund. So it gives me that additional edge to say, I understand the philanthropic side of the house, but it's also about the community, and that cultural context is really critical to the table.
Yeah, thank you all for those responses. And just a bit of insight into my brain, I'm asking that because I wanted the undercurrent there to be for the Black male leader, particularly in the education space. You can't just show up with what's on your job description. And oftentimes you're being uniquely hired to bring the intangibles into the role. So you're doing more than one job, and it just adds to the complexity of this work, right? Dr. Bradley, let me ask you a question. You're at the helm of a system that wasn't necessarily created with equity in mind. As you do your work, what are the noticings? What are the things that we're going to have to unlearn as far as the education system is concerned to continue to bolster the support for Black and brown students?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think the lead-in is appropriate. There are very few century-old legacy institutions that were built with equity in mind, like the one that I happen to lead. I do think it's important to note that I work for a supportive board of education that places that is very serious about increasing access and opportunities for our young people, and we've made some really good progress in that regard. But I think at the same time, one of the things that I've noticed is that, look, I work in a school system, in a county, in a region that is very diverse, has gone through significant transition over the past 25 years or so. But I also recognize that I serve kids who are largely school dependent, right? That their entire academic experience is informed by the curriculum that we expose them to, the quality of teaching and learning that happens to happen within the four walls of their classrooms. And I care significantly about that experience. But I also wonder a lot of times whether or not that is enough for our kids to be able to navigate a world that they are going to eventually inhabit. Is the curriculum exposure that they have, the books that we present in front of them, is it enough, right? And I've really kind of come to the conclusion that it's not enough. And I think the question for our parents and families is, how do we adequately supplement the educational experience in what we expose our young people to in a way that allows them to have a broader educational experience? I think there has been, for me, an irony in this, I think everybody is familiar with this, the Charlie Kirk killing and this debate between Nick Fuentes and Charlie Kirk, and you're probably familiar with those names. I was intellectually curious about how those men came into the ideologies that they embrace, right? And I looked at some old interviews, and they were talking about how at the ages of 11 and 12 and 13, they were reading Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman and having these ideas about society. And then they let their formal education really define who they were intellectually. Or they let the learnings that they had independent of their schooling experience allow them to push back on their educational experience. And so what I began to wonder is, what are the foundational texts that I think our young people need to be reading, right? To help inform their educational experience. What are the, if I had my list, it would be The Souls of Black Folk, Up from Slavery. If I'm an educator, it would be Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks. It would be Other People's Children. It would be any number of texts that I think help to inform who I am as an individual, who I am as a professional, who I am as a Black man, and who I am in every other space. And so I think the question is really about disabusing our parents and families, that when we send our, and I say this as the leader of a school system, disabusing our parents of the fact that, of the thought that just because they send their kids to school, kindergarten through 12th grade, that they have gotten an education that is adequate for who they are in the world that they're going to ultimately inhabit.
Yeah, really beautiful response. And so apropos, in the name of legislation that is attempting to keep that sort of knowledge away from our kids. As a point of privilege, I spend a lot of time with superintendents, and I often am speaking similarly to them about what is it? What's happening? And what I'm learning is the biggest impediment between putting our kids where they need to be and the other students in the district is people don't understand what equity work means. There's a lot that gets lost in translation around what is required to play the catch-up game. And I am finding on the national level, the data is suggesting that there is a regressive approach in order to meet Black kids where they are, instead of this sort of digested understanding that they can and they will, and you raise the bar and give them the tools to meet that. It's just a really interesting topic for me, and it's timely because it's going to, every day we have to talk about it is another day the kids got to learn, right? These are the students that are going to run our country one day. So thank you for that, Dr. Bradley. Terrell, I want to talk to you. The philanthropy side of things. You sat on both sides of the house. You started with the space is largely dominated by white women. There's a ton of money in the philanthropy space. We see it being thrown around to close this education gap, this equity gap. There's a lot of money in the space. The gap doesn't seem to be closing as quickly as the money is coming in. What's going wrong at the philanthropic level? What are they missing? What's the disconnect between investment and outcome?
That's a tough question. That question is layered, and it's really tough. I think there's two ways I'll answer that. I think the first one is that oftentimes foundations aren't informed by the people, right? So like, I work at a family foundation. Our family started from the family that I work for, they're descendants of a life insurance company that started in the 1800s. And the creators of that life insurance were Confederate soldiers, right? So this is like deep rooted money here. Our endowment is about $65 million. It's led entirely by descendants of this family who relatively didn't really have to work, right? They benefited from the wealth of the wealth holder of the family name. And so they're essentially deciding where grant funding goes. And they've never really gone to Title I schools. They've never really stepped foot in many of the communities that we support or fund. So there's a disconnect just in terms of proximity, right? So if you don't know, you oftentimes assume, or you read the data and you make references based off of data to help inform that decision, but oftentimes that's not the case. The second point is, I think that you have a senator here. I think oftentimes the solutions that we want to see, they take some direct service work, but these are deep-rooted systems. right? And there's a quote: "The systems are designed to maintain themselves." So if we fund programs, or we fund some of these direct service solutions without truly addressing the systemic changes that undergird that really uphold these systems, will essentially be kind of in the same cycle. So oftentimes the advocacy systems change strategies are the parts that are not funded, right? We don't touch that part because it's political. You get into politics, you get into people's, personal, political ideologies. But that's what I'm attempting to do. It's not easy. We fund across 3 areas, not only education, but we also fund health access and environmental justice. In each of these 3 themes, again, there are policies that hold these systems up, and really are the reasons why we're in this space now having this conversation. So I think the biggest challenge of philanthropy is, one, the lack of access to community. And the second part is we focus on the direct service work, which is needed. We often don't think about how we talk to the senators about what's happening and put pressure on the legislative to make informed decisions for our communities.
I'm going to him right now. But I hope you heard, Terrell, it's an overfunded space with underfunded impact. So I hope that what he just said, that he is working on, the pot of money that he controls, I hope that for all of you advocates in the room, for all of you that are sitting on a seed of an idea about something that could move the needle for Black and brown kids, that go talk to Terrell. Senator Kemp, Jason, I am very curious about what's happening at the policy level. You have also sat on both sides of the House. What is the truth about how policy really gets made? And what is important for the educators in the room to know or understand if they want to influence change in legislation for Black people?
Well, first off, the truth is that we need more educators making policy. We do not have enough people that are making these decisions, that have been in a classroom, that have led a school. And so you're, creating policies that's going to fund every child in the state. And it's not made a priority to fix that since 1985. Like, just think about how much has changed in the world since 1985. But yet, the way that we fund education in Georgia is still the same it was in 1985 when I was 5 years old. That has to change. And a great example of that is the fact that you have so many southern states that have now changed their funding formulas to make it more student-centered. For far too long, we've kind of been resource-centered. These are the resources we have. How do we, fairly, pass these out? Instead of going from a perspective, this type of students needs this type of education in order to be successful, and how do we fund that? And so we need more advocates reaching out and to, Senate and House leadership, to the governor, because this is something that takes a all lean in type of moment. And if there's no gubernatorial leadership, updating our formula is not going to change. Just this last cycle, for the first time, Georgia has been for the longest, one of only 6 states that does not give an additional weight or additional funding for students that are in poverty. And so the attempt, instead of actually doing it, the House introduced like $13 million that's now in our budget to be given as an additional funding to educate students that are in poverty. Even with that, there's been some flaws. Fulton County was told they're not eligible for it. While they still have schools that are 100% free and reduced lunch, the way that the department decided to implement it is based upon the whole district. And we know there's huge disparities here in Fulton County as it relates to opportunity, success, access. So, those types of things we need to know and be aware is happening, and going down to the Capitol and speaking to the people that's pressing those buttons. It is so important to have us in the hallway. I see Tolton and, the superintendents and school board members are always, they come down to the Capitol. You don't have to be in one of those roles to come and speak to us. And it doesn't just have to be about education. We all know there are so many things that impact the success of our students in education. The fact that SNAP benefits are going to be cut. Like, we have a huge burden that's been placed upon us next year to figure out how do we as a state now take so much of the responsibility that's being pushed down on us and ensure that there's equity in that. And by God, if we're not part of that conversation, we're not going to get the resources we need in our community to ensure that we continue to have conversations like this.
Can I double down on that?
Sure.
I mean, first of all, I think everything that Senator Kemp said is absolutely right. I was not engaging in the legislative process because I didn't think the legislative process had that I had anything to contribute or add to it, right? It really wasn't until I assumed the superintendency that it was incumbent upon me and expected for me to be a part of the legislative session and to really, because we were obligated to create legislative priorities. I'm like, what legislative priorities? What are our legislative priorities? I'm just trying to make sure the kids know how to read and write and compute and think critically. But the extent to which we can do that effectively is informed largely by policy, right, and legislation. And the challenges oftentimes that and the hurdles that we have to get over are oftentimes can be removed by policy. And so voice and presence and advocacy truly, truly matter. And so as the legislative session gets started in January, I just encourage, if you've not spent any time under the Gold Dome, to really, really be present.
Thank you. What you said, Dr. Bradley, I just wanted to double click again on, maybe it's a triple click at this point, but the advocacy piece, right? Who is sitting at the table when we decide how that $13 million is going to get distributed among students? How did Fulton County get left out of that conversation, right? That's the advocacy piece. When more of us, the people that think like the way people think in this room, are at those tables, we're able to impact the legislation. How do you run for office, Malik, right? How do you become a politician? I just have ambition and energy around impact. That's enough, right? There are organizations built and funded to look for passionate educators that will drive you to and through any particular political space you want to enter, because they're looking for people like us to impact the way that the world runs. Speaking of which, vote Dr. Jonathan Leon for Atlanta Public School Board. Where are you? We'll find him. Oh, he's right there. Sorry, had to call you out there. I want to ask the group a question. I drew out from the things that you've all shared individually that this requires more than what meets the job description. You also are in roles that aren't necessarily found on the LinkedIn page, right? This is passion-driven work that you happen to be earning a living for. So I'm very curious about the cost of your leadership. What is the cost that you've had to pay to sort of exist in your system of leadership, the personal cost on you? I bet there are folks in the room who are dealing with that daily. What's the trade-off?
I think that's a really good question too. I think for me, and I mentioned the proximity piece, I think oftentimes philanthropy especially is a cushy position, right? Folks don't often leave philanthropy. I've been at 2 foundations now, national and local. Folks stay in these roles for a while. You can exist in these roles and really be void of community. And I think that's the biggest challenge for this role is how do you continue, for me, how do I push myself to continue to be as proximate as possible? When I was in the classroom, of course, I had direct impact on students. Now I'm like 2 or 3 steps removed. I fund the nonprofit that works with the kids, students, or I might fund the nonprofit that services the school that works with the students. So the data that I'm getting is kind of anecdotal. It's some quantitative, qualitative data but I have to actually make myself more visible and present. Most foundation leaders, foundations, generally don't have to do that, right? We have an office downtown. It's nice. It's great. But to be able to leave that and truly try to be proximate, and not only just for myself, but for our trustees, how to create systems and conditions where I'm either bringing folks in, pulling them in. It changes the way our foundation operates. And so for me, the biggest challenge is continuing to be proximate and also bring others along in my learning journey.
Can I push on you?
Yeah.
Okay. what parts of you have you had to hide, change, show up in a different way in order to be successful in your industry?
Yeah. It's a good question too. I think the biggest challenge is, so again, I work for a foundation. I mentioned it's a family-led foundation. I would say by and large, everyone is well-intentioned. Like they all want to see the funding go to the right spaces. What I've had to give up is, I mentioned the political piece. There's some things I want to push for. I may have to do it strategically, right? I may not have to be able to, it may not be this year, it may be next year. I may have to, a trustee may have an idea that they want to fund. Yeah, I may have to, go ahead and cut that check to that organization, even though I may have some challenges with that. And it's a little bit of playing the internal politic game, right? So like, there are plenty of organizations and ideas that I want to get across the finish line, but it may not be the right time. May not have the right buy-in. So part of my leadership journey, I mean, when I was a teacher, I taught English. I had Malcolm X posters in my room. Like I was very upfront. And I'm still that way now in terms of how I show up. But I've had to be more strategic about how I promote and socialize ideas. And really the idea of talking about my thinking has been something I've had to learn as a leader, of not just making decisions, but being able to shape a narrative and a story around the decisions that I make. So I think if anything, it's just being a little bit more strategic about the way I go about the practices of deploying capital. And again, all of this is to bring others along. I don't make the final call. It's not my money, right? So this is family's money. So I have to figure out how to get them bought into the system. And that is sometimes challenging. And I've gotten a lot of pushback too. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can't just come in and throw all the money at the Black organizations because that's what you're passionate about. You got to play the long game, right? Feed into the strategy so you can get your work done with a blanket of protection over you. Senator Kemp, Dr. Bradley, any reactions?
Yeah, I would say for me, this work, I'm not making a lot of money from it. So don't get into politics if you think you're gonna make a lot of money, because you do not. And it's not part-time. It's literally a whole nother full-time job that you're doing in addition to your day job. So obviously, the way that our legislature works was not created for people to look like us. It was created for white people that have a lot of money, or that are retired, or people that have access that, typically we don't. We're having to balance having full-time jobs, having families, and doing this work. And, for me, what it has taught me is to be that much more authentically me. When I first ran for office, I ran for the House. And folks were asking, well, how are you going to run? When I start meeting with consultants and like, okay, what does that mean? Like, I'm not sure what you're asking. And then eventually realize I'm a Black gay man. And they were asking me, how are you going to run in the South? Are you going to let people know, one, that you're gay, and two, that you have a husband? And so in that moment, I gave a little. And I didn't hide who I was. I would always say, married to my husband, or people, if I knock on their door and say, hope your wife is treating you well, my husband, so I was coming out like all the time. But I also gave, because on my first mailer that I didn't put my family. And that still to this day eats at me, because here I am running to represent people and I'm not representing myself. And so after that first mailer, that immediately changed me. Like, I will go to the Capitol with paint on my nails, and I'm much more willing to speak about my family, because ultimately all our voices need to be in these rooms when policies are made. And yes, it's a big sacrifice. There are times like I, can't go see my daughter's, dance recital, or, can't be at this event that my husband's, job is doing. But ultimately, we're able to do work that impacts people's lives. And it's not just through, writing bills. Constituent services means so much to so many people in our community, whether they're not getting, unemployment checks or, they're having issues with transportation. Like there are so many things that you do as a legislator that's beyond just writing a bill, which is very hard to do, I've learned. But, there's so much work that needs to be done, and we need more brothers doing this. There's truly not enough of us.
Thank you. And thank you for your reflection and the adjustment that you've made to live in your truth. As you were talking, I didn't blame you for taking a blanket of protection for you and your family, but the bravery and the courage that you are putting forward in your leadership. I'm someone who looks like us, who lives to live in their truth, right? Which makes it visible to everyone coming after them. So thank you for all that you're doing. Dr. Bradley, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm a baby superintendent. There are so many other superintendents in the metro area that have so much more experience and insights into this work than I do. On October 23rd, I'll be starting my third full year. But one of the early lessons that I learned from the superintendency from a mentor that I really value is that you've got to remember that your job is to represent the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of a community. Your job is not to build a school system in your vision. I am responsive to a 5-person board of education, and they are responsive to the desires of an entire community. And my job is to make sure that they see themselves and their interests reflected in the educational experience of the kids that they send to the schools that I lead. And so what that means is that, it's like a boxing match. I take my wins where I can get them, and my L's, which will inevitably come. And I go back to my corner, and they give me a couple of minutes to recover, and I go back at it. The point around loss is that, I have to be careful about strongly advocating for the things that I want, if the things that I want are not reflective of what the desires of the community are. And I think that is a duality, that a space that you live in where you've got to manage that. And I think that there are oftentimes things that are the will of the community that I would maybe go a different direction on, but that's a part of the job. I think the best example that I've ever seen this illustrated is in the movie The Tuskegee Airmen. If you've never seen that movie, this might be more of a Red Tails generation, but if you've never seen Tuskegee Airmen, there's a character that's played by Courtney B. Vance. And he's the highest ranking Black official that these cadets who ascended on Tuskegee to prepare to be fighter pilots in the Army. And what Courtney B. Vance had to do was hold the cadets to account, but fight like hell for them in rooms and spaces that they never saw, right? And that is not always visible. And I think it creates frustration for people sometimes, right? That there are politics that you have to navigate. There are circumstances that you have to navigate. And sometimes you emerge out of those rooms after having advocated for things and for people that you were not able to convince people of. And you still got to go back out and hold people to account. That's the space that I live in quite a lot. And that is what about this job feels a lot like loss.
Yeah. Thank you for saying, Dr. Bradley, he is being bashful. This is his third year, but the superintendent turnover rate is 61% year over year. You're doing great work, sir. Something is going well in Newton County. So congratulations on all of that. And you just reminded me that the work that you all do has to be positioned better than kicking down the door for the group that you came in to support. We're all going into with intentions. I know that I'm in my work for Black and brown kids, right? But if your community has Latinos and white people, and you have to serve your constituents. To your point earlier, Terrell, it's about playing the long game. Keep your intention top of mind, but run toward the strategy that you were hired to perform your job excellently, so that you can make the change for the people that you came to support. I was curious, from that last question, just show of hands, who did that resonate with? How many of you have understood that there are pieces of you that you have to make concessions on to do your job with success? Okay. That's sort of what I was expecting. It's a closing question. Sorry, team. But my final question is to the room. There's a leader in here, a potential one, right? Speak to the next generation of leaders. Someone in this room is wondering if they have what it takes. Are they ready? When do I start my organization? How do I run for Senate? I'm a teacher, but I'd love to lead a district one day. What advice would you offer to the young leaders in the room? And I want to hear from each of you, please.
I was talking to brother Justin. Where's Justin? Justin, we met. Justin is an English teacher at Kemp, and I remember being a young English teacher several years ago, and we were talking about his aspirations. I think it's my responsibility to speak to the aspirations of people, particularly Black men in rooms like this. The question of readiness is a challenging one. Some people think that it is objective, meaning, I've got this experience, I've got these degrees, I've been in this work for this many years, I'm ready for something new and different. And you could be. And then some people think it's subjective, right? Like, sometimes you get thrust into opportunities that you may not necessarily be objectively prepared and ready for. So I don't know that there is a clear barometer or standard for readiness. What I will say is that I do believe that you can absolutely not be ready if you don't know what you believe in. I give a talk at Morehouse every year, and I talk to young people about not taking their college experience for granted. Use this time as an opportunity to develop an intellectual foundation. So, because if you don't know what you believe in, you will be swayed and moved in every direction, and there will be no foundation for any of the decisions that you will ultimately have to make once you assume a leadership position. So if you don't know what you believe in, it's hard to really be an effective leader. I believe that all children can achieve at high levels if they're given the right resources, the right supports, and placed in the care of a continuously improving adult. I haven't always believed that because I haven't always known that to be true. But I can tell you that was largely informed by the things that I learned and read and experienced. And I will tell you that in any interview that I've ever gone into, if I didn't understand the question that was being asked to me, or if I didn't necessarily have a great answer, I would always fall back on what my core beliefs were. And so what I would say is that if you think that you are prepared to get to the next level or for some higher levels of responsibility and leadership, just make sure you are absolutely clear and you know without a doubt, unequivocally, what you believe in and what you subscribe to.
For me, I would say if you are even considering or have thought about running for office, to do it. There's always going to be like a voice somewhere that says, this probably isn't the right time, or, this person has, held this seat for 20 years and, how dare I think about, challenging them. I'll be fully transparent and say that the Democratic Party does a horrible job of lifting up the next round of leadership. You have people, a lot of people that look like us, that get these seats and hold on to them for decades. And there is no way in hell that somebody that has been in these seats for 25 years is doing the same level of work that I am doing in my first year. There's just no way. I mean, it is physically taxing, it's mentally taxing, you're, sacrificing a lot. I just cannot imagine. And, the sad thing is we have a horrible history of just because there's an I next to somebody's name, we go in and click it because we don't educate ourselves enough to know like this person is not giving me the service, the level of service I should be expecting for our community. There is so much that we can do. And yes, our politics is very divided right now. But I would highly suggest that we should not, especially if you're in Georgia, always, have that reflexive action to say, you know what, I'm going to support this person because they say everything that I want them to say, and they fight against everything Republicans do. If you really want to be an effective legislator in Georgia, you have to work with Republicans. We've gotten to a point where working together in collaboration, because we can't stand the guy who calls himself the president of the United States. And, we don't recognize that many of the things that, folks do that we, can't stand, they do it because they know if they don't, they're going to be primaried and not have their seat. But also going in, like you said, with the end in mind, like I want to change the lives of boys who look like me. And if I'm going to do that, I have to recognize that across this state, 70% of our kids are not reading on grade level. That means only 3 out of 10. And so if I want to give young boys that look like me a better opportunity and shot at life, and not to end up in the Fulton County Jail, which is in my district, I have to be paying attention to these 3rd grade reading levels, because that shit is real. Georgia now has the largest detention center, ICE detention center in the country. This stuff's happening in our backyard. And it's not enough of us that are raising hell about it, because they're allowed to just do some of this stuff right under our noses, because we kind of just go along and, oh, it's not us. That's the worst thing that any minority group could say. Well, it's not us. Because at some point it will be again. And in order to stop some of that stuff from happening, we have to run for office. We have to be in the rooms where these conversations are being made. And we have to be the ones that's willing to work across where we can without jeopardizing our principles to get bills passed. I was only one of 2 freshman Democrats in the House or Senate to have a bill signed by the governor this year.
You go, Senator.
And that's because I realize I have to play that game. It's not about jeopardizing who you are. It's learning how you play this game to get what you need. Now, as a result, every teacher in this state is now going to be properly prepared to teach kids how to read. And so that's how we impact lives that look like us.
It's this is a good question, and I don't really have too much substantive to add. I think to be honest with you, I've dissuaded folks sometimes from even going into philanthropy. I think I would push you to think about, if you're thinking about philanthropy specifically, what type of impact do you want to have? You could have a much greater impact in the classroom. You could have a greater impact running a school, running a nonprofit than you sometimes will in a foundation space. So I think it just kind of depends. But I will say that for me, the foundation of everything has started in the classroom. I was telling somebody, I think I stopped teaching in 2015, 15 years. And all the tools that I learned when I was teaching are the same tools that I use to manage a trustee, do meetings, like same tools. The way I organize my team are the same ways I organize my classroom. So the skills that we've learned, foundational skills that if you're interested in any of these sectors, specifically philanthropy, I think you will be successful. How to look at data. I mean, all of these small things that we don't think are like assets are major assets that I use every single day. I will push you to really think about what type of impact you want to have. Then we can have a conversation if the philanthropic space is the right space. But similar to probably a superintendent, for Black folks, there's a lot of attrition in foundations and philanthropy. Like we go in and out of these spaces, and oftentimes it's because there's roadblocks. We can't push the visions that we want to push. We may find greater impact being on the nonprofit side than we do on the foundation side. But yeah, that's what I'll say.
Yeah, I contend. As a former second grade teacher myself, I contend. Adults are worse than kids. And if you can teach, you can do absolutely anything. I think like just in the same way that you gotta sign up for selective service to get federal funds. I think a part of entering society should be like everybody either is like a teacher or a server, right? Like you need to learn what's happening on the ground level in the world. I don't know. I'm getting the boot, guys, but I just wanted to say, titles aside, Terrell, Jason, Duke, thank you for opening up to this room. I hope that this was valuable for you to see the leader away from the desk, title stripped away. the impact that you all are driving in your roles is not lost on me, and I doubt anyone in the room at this point. So thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for your time this morning. To Ayodele and BMEsTalk, thank you for having us. Be